Hello, my name is Sergey Pogrubnyak. I'm with the Research and Development at Software AG. In the previous video, we have covered how to use out-of-the-box HTTPS setup with Command Central 9.6. Today, we'll go over how to use self-signed certificates to achieve maximum security. The first thing we need to do is to generate custom certificates. This is the wiki page that shows how to do that step by step. As the result, you should have the root certificate, JKS file, also the .cer file that you can import into the browser or the client trust store, as well as you're going to have SPM JKS file and CC JKS file that we need for our setup. Then, once you have those files, you need to import them into the trust stores for the command line tool and for the Command Central server itself. Then, copy all those files to the target Command Central server, the command line tool, and all target SPM nodes. In my example, I did copy those files to the target Command Central server into the as Software AG certificates folder. The next step would be to update client configuration to use those certificates. That includes updating HTTPS port on Command Central, updating browser certificates list, setting up the command line tool SSL configuration, and performing the same HTTPS configuration of the port on all SPMs, as well as updating SSL configuration for the client running within Command Central server. So let's go through all those steps one by one. When we access Command Central Web UI using default certificates and we check the certificate information, we can see that the default certificate it was generated by SAG. There is some generic common name, and obviously this certificate was not signed by trusted issuer, and that's why we have this warning, red set warning. So since we generated our certificates for our specific host, cc.company.com, we should be able to remove that red sign when we try to access Command Central Web UI. So let's see how to do it. So we need to go to the Command Central configuration. For the Command Central server itself, open ports, open default HTTPS port, and make some changes. So we're going to keep the same port number, although you can create a new port, give it a different number, and keep the original one around. It's up to you. I will just update the existing port, and all I need to do is to change the security configuration to point to my new certificate. So the default location of the out-of-the-box certificate points to the profile CC configuration security and then demo key store JKS file. I will point that location to my custom certificate that I generate specifically for cc.company.com, and I use the same path for the trust store. The password is the same as default. I use manage as my password. You could use your custom password. Obviously, it's up to you. And now I'm ready to save the changes. While the change is applied, you may see some errors, or the server may not respond for a few seconds because the server is restarting its HTTPS listener. But after a few seconds, it should come back. And now the settings are applied, and let's check if our certificate information has been updated. And it is indeed. Now it shows the cc.company.com, and we check the details. The details are different. They are custom that I use to generate this certificate. These are not the default ones. But we still see the red warning when we access this URL because the browser cannot trust our certificate because it's self-signed. But Fortunately, there is an easy solution for that. All we need to do is to let browser trust our certificate, and how to do that depends on your browser and operating system. For my case, all I need to do is import ccroot.certificate into the keychain and say I want to trust this certificate. I need to provide my administrator password to make those changes. Now, once the certificate is in here, the last step is just to update the browser, and now we see that it is green and it says this identity is verified, but we still see the same, obviously the same certificate that we used before. Now, when we're done with configuring HTTPS port on Command Central server and updating browser configuration to include our certificate and mark it as a trusted one, we're ready to switch to the command line configuration and make it work as well. As I covered in the previous video, the default settings for out-of-the-box certificates allow you to communicate with Command Central server without any changes. But now, once we have our custom certificates in place, we should be able to make this communication even more secure. For that purposes, I have updated Command Central server.properties file to point to our custom certificate, custom trust store that has the certificate in it. And as well, I turned off the trust all host switch to false, meaning that now our client will refuse to connect to a host that claims to be a Command Central server, which is much more secure than the default setup. So let's see if it works. So all we need to do is to perform the list landscape nodes command, and with the debug switch we can see that it still goes to the same host and it works. And to prove that the default setup doesn't work, let's try this command with the default settings. So I have cc-defaults properties file that contains out-of-the-box settings with default trust store and trust all host setting, and see if I can use it with our Command Central server. And as you can see, it doesn't work. The SSL channel throws an error. But if we use this default settings with the server that still runs the default certificate, it should work. So let's try that. So let's point our command line tool to a different server, and we should be able to communicate with it. Yes, so it works. And if we check, this other server uses the default certificate, and that's why our default command line settings work just fine. This concludes the configuration setup of the command line tool. Now we need to change the HTTPS configuration for the port on SPM and each SPM that we want to connect to. The procedure is identical to what we've done on the Command Central server itself. So you go to the SPM that you need to connect to, open its configuration, ports, and then you can either change the default HTTPS port or create a new HTTPS port and delete the original one. I will update the original port, scroll down to the security config, and choose the location of the custom certificate. The only difference that you need to specify the SPM JKS. The difference between this key store file and the one we use for the CC is that this JKS file includes the certificate that matches the wildcard star.company.com, so that it could work for server 1, server 2, server 3, and many other servers that we need to connect to. It's up to you how you want to generate it. You can use a host-specific certificate for each host, or you can use a wildcard. It's absolutely up to you. Once we change the configuration pointed to our JKS file, all we need to do is to click Save. This may take a few seconds because HTTPS listener is getting restarted. As you can see, my original configuration that was using the non-verified identity with the default certificate now is being restored. If I refresh this page, it's server3.company.com, identity verified, and this is our custom certificate start.company.com. So that means that we successfully updated our HTTPS connection. And the last step of our procedure is to configure Command Central Server client SSL configuration to point to our custom trust store, and we'd like to set ignore HTTP hosts verification to be false. So for that, we need to go to configuration, properties, and then SSL connection properties. Click edit and make sure that the trust store location points to our custom cc-truststore.jks file that we generated, and we want to change the ignore host verification to no. And obviously we need to update the password for the trust store to match what it actually is. Once we do that, click Save. The configuration is updated on the fly, and that is going to be active right away. Then to verify that connection is working correctly, you can go to any of the configured nodes, and then open details, make sure the connection uses the HTTPS port and uses SSL flag, and click refresh. And if you don't get any errors, that means the connection is working, goes over SSL using the custom certificates on the server side, on the SPM side, and on the client side, which is Command Central in this case. And we have successfully configured that communication to be the most secure possible way. Couple of final notes recommended for your procedure order. It is very difficult to perform HTTPS or SSL channel reconfiguration while you're using HTTPS itself. It's like changing the engine of a flying airplane. So it is much simpler or easier, safer to switch everything to HTTP communication, including the CC SPM local connection first, and then all other remote SPMs to use HTTP. Then start step by step, configure the HTTPS port on Command Central itself, verify that you can connect to this port in the browser, see that the check mark is green. You can verify the certificates details in the browser directly. You can repeat then the same procedure for a single SPM remote node, and then you can change your SSL settings for Command Central and then try to connect to this remote SPM using SSL. And if everything works fine, then you can switch all other SPM nodes to use the same HTTPS configuration. And the final note about the possibility to configure HTTPS with previous releases, it's possible to do exactly the same configuration for 9.0 and 9.5 nodes. The only things that you need to know is that if you reconfigure 9.0 SPMs, they have to be restarted manually using shell scripts, or if you're on Windows, you can use Windows Service Control. 9.5 SPMs can be restarted from the web UI or command line using the supported features for lifecycle operations, while the 9.6 SPMs restore themselves automatically when you make changes to HTTPS, which makes them very convenient to reconfigure. But at the end of the day, you can configure all those 3 releases currently supported, 9.0, 9.5, and 9.6, use the same custom certificates that you generated for your HTTPS setup. In my example, I have 9.0, 9.5, and 9.6 all using HTTPS ports and exactly the same certificates that I used for original HTTPS setup for 9.6. That concludes our demo. Thanks for watching.